In this video, we will continue looking at writing classes. So far, we have named and defined our instance and class level variables. Now we move on to subgoal 6 and create constructors or behaviors that create the initial state of an object. All constructors should be public, have the same name as the class, have no return type, not even void, and for a default constructor, it has no parameters. The logic inside the constructor should be to initialize all variables to a valid state, and then you can repeat as needed, adding other constructors by adding other parameters, so each constructor has a different signature, or parameter list. We are continuing with the same problem, writing a class to represent an instance of time. The attributes have been declared, and in this video, we will write a default and overloaded constructor. Here is our UML. We are now in the third portion of the box, where you can see we have added two constructors. We know they are constructors because the name of the method is the same name as the class. The first one is public and has no parameters. It will be a default constructor. The next one takes 3 parameters, 3 integers. We call this a specific or overloaded constructor. Let's start with a default constructor. First, we declare the constructor as public. We know the name because it is the same name as the class, time type. It has no return type. And for the default constructor, it has no parameters. The logic inside is to initialize all variables to a logical state. In this case, we initialize our 3 attributes, hour, minute, and second, to all have an initial value of 0. Now, for the overloaded constructor. Again, it is public. It has the same name as the class, no return type, and it has 3 parameters, all integers. We can decide what order we want to put them in, and here we are doing first hour, then minute, then second. Notice that the names of the parameters and the parameter list are different from the instance attributes. The instance attributes are hour spelled out, minute spelled out, and second spelled out. We have created different names in the parameter list to make them distinguishable from the attributes. For the logic, we want to make sure that the variables we bring in as parameters have valid values before we assign them to our instance attributes. For our first parameter, hour, the value needs to be between 0 and 23 inclusive. So we check that before we assign the value to our instance attribute hour. Min must be between 0 and 59 inclusive before we assign it to the instance attribute minute. And sec must be between 0 and 59 inclusive before we assign it to the instance attribute second. It is important to make sure that any data that comes in as parameters is validated before assigning it an instance attribute. Now that we have defined our constructors, we can begin our test code. Here, we have declared 2 new instances of the time type class, one called midnight and one called noon. For midnight, we have called the default constructor by saying new time type with no parameters. This will call the default constructor, which initialized all of the variables to 0, or midnight. For noon, we have declared a new instance where the hour is 12, the minute is 0, and the second is 0, or noon.